Welcome, everyone, to the next episode of the Amplifier podcast. Today, I'm super excited to talk to this entrepreneur and wonderful lady, Shelby Scarborough. She's the founder of the company Practical Protocol. Now, Shelby has such an incredible and interesting and intriguing journey of how she developed her career. She started her career and her entrepreneurial journey as a teenager when her parents became franchisee operators and builders of the Burger King franchise, and that was her first job. After college, Shelby was presented with an opportunity to become part of some of modern history's most iconic political leaders in the form of Ronald Reagan, the Berlin Wall, and Mikhail Gorbachev. After working with the Reagan administration, Shelby joined the State Department and was focused on the Office of Protocol and really learning and having to interact with many international dignitaries and interacting and understanding their multiple cultures. In 1990, she started her business Practical Protocol, and with some of her first client was a modern history icon that most people will recognize, Nelson Mandela, and her second client was Pope John Paul II. The school that my daughter goes to today is named after Pope John Paul II. Shelby has a passion for helping entrepreneurs leverage civility and protocol to enhance their relationships. Her first book, Civility Rules, are based on the rules of civility and showing us how George Washington's rules of civility can apply to us in living our lives. Her newest book is called The Joy Journey, and I'm interested to learn more about that. And her newest venture that I'm also excited to share with our listeners is a new way for entrepreneurs to think about getting an MBA with her Global School of Entrepreneurship. Everyone, please welcome Shelby to the Amplifier podcast. Shelby, I'm super excited to talk to you about all of these things and share with our listeners your really unique journey.
My goodness, thank you so much. It's really a nice introduction. It's a little embarrassing to hear it because I'm just your average Joe working their way through life. But I've had some really interesting opportunities, and I'm very grateful to have had them. And I know that it is fun to share some of those moments with people who have an interest in those kind of iconic people, because not very many people do get an opportunity to kind of hang out with heads of state and stuff like that. So it's been a little bit of a rarefied atmosphere, but I'm happy to be here and happy to tell you anything you want to know.
Yeah, I mean, as I was sort of getting ready for our show, I was just super intrigued by the journey, and it's likely that you couldn't plan this stuff. It's not like you had a career path plan when you were 16 or 17 that said I'm gonna work with these people. Let's talk about your journey that starts off with working in a family business.
Yeah, my parents decided, my dad had been a stockbroker doing really well on a great trajectory with Dean Witter. And for all we know, I mean, he could have ended up running the place. Who knows? I mean, he was on a really, really good trajectory. But I think that he and my mother decided that, as he said, that their entire net worth, walked around in their pocket right then. Because if he stopped working, there was no residual income. It was just everyday thing. So they wanted to establish a business that could have residual income, that was making money in theory if they weren't making every hamburger, and to train other people to do it and grow from there. And so we got involved. We're all three kids, three girls. I'm the oldest. So I was about 14 when we started it, 15 by the time we opened. And my very first job was working in our first Burger King restaurant in Danville, California. And so my sisters did the same thing, even younger than I did. They swept the floors. We all slept on the benches as my parents were opening a restaurant, and late at night we'd be there. So we would be sleeping in the booths, waiting for our parents to take us home. But it just sort of seeps into your skin as far as what it takes to run a business. And it's not always glamorous. It's not always pretty, but the journey of an entrepreneur in particular, you have to have the right mentality and the right attitude. And so I think I have a little bit of DNA in there from my parents, and a little bit of experience from them as well. And that has done a lot to make up sort of how I look at the world and approach just about everything I do.
I mean, it's when you think about, flipping burgers and whatever the franchisee is, for most of the last 40 or 50 plus, maybe 60 years, that's kind of like the iconic teenage first job, isn't it?
It is. And in fact, McDonald's, who is always, we were Burger King and I love Burger King as a product. I've always admired McDonald's marketing, and they've done a great job through the years of appealing to the different target markets that they want to reach. One of them that just came out with again was America's best first job. And I thought, good for them. That's what we've always felt that the industry was built on, was a great first job for people, because it taught you how to show up on time, keep your space neat, keep your clothes neat, your presentation well done for an outward facing world, that kind of thing. Excuse me. But it's evolved into full-time jobs for people. And so it's kind of gotten a bad rap for being not a good job. And that's not true. We raised almost all of our managers. And I say we did in our own business that I had in Virginia, but my parents' restaurants, they have people that were with them for 20, 30, and almost 40 years. And so it's not because they didn't have anywhere else to go. It's because it was a good career path. And we have all different kinds of people in this world who need all different kinds of jobs filled. So I've always been a little put off by putting down the burger industry as a place to work, because there's a lot of really good opportunities that have come out of it for a lot of people, including scholarships to college and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, compared to what, right? I mean, is what people should ask is it is or it isn't a great job compared to what? Yeah. And compared to what opportunities people have and don't have. Mm-hmm. And, I know many people who have gone the track of being managers or supervisors in those sorts of businesses and have, happy, healthy, successful lives. But if you're comparing someone who it's an entry-level job on the cash register, if that's going to be your full-time job, yeah, I mean, some of those activities by the nature of check writers are going to be lower paying jobs, because if we wanted some of those the entry level service jobs to be six-figure salaries, then we'd be willing to pay $12 for a hamburger.
Yeah, it's getting there. Yeah, you think
it is getting there, but the fact is that everything we sell and everything we do in business is derived by what people are willing to pay for it, and you've got to make the business work. And so, yep. If you want a career in that space, then you also need to. And one of my core values in my business is always be growing. So, if you start off an entry level, and I love giving people in my businesses entry level jobs, and then watching them grow into leadership and finding their own feet, and I think that's the opportunity that those businesses give people who choose the career path option. So, but I love the simple lessons that first job teaches, right? Like, show up on time.
Yeah, what a concept.
Be presentable to the world, because you might be a 15-year-old kid who's on the cash register, but you're the face of the company in front of the customer.
That's right.
And so learning to be there on time, be reliable, be dependable, be presentable are basic foundational life skills for wherever you take your life. And if you don't learn those early, they become real problematic when you have other jobs where people are not going to tolerate if you don't show up on time.
Things like anticipation, that's a huge quality for an entrepreneur and a good employee in a company, is anticipating what comes next. So just the simple lesson of when you're standing at what we would call the boards, because we have a broiler and the hamburger comes off. And so the board's making the hamburgers. If there's nothing going on right at that second, I mean, leaning on the counter, we were taught, you don't need to lean, right? Always be moving. You say always be growing. We were always be moving. So yeah. If there's not your job right there in front of you to do, there's something else that needs to be done. Help somebody else do something, restock, look for the opportunities to fill the gaps, and don't wait to be told. And those are show the initiative, anticipation. Those are great, incredible skills that make a a new person, entry level job person, really valuable in their next job, and that increases their opportunities exponentially just by that simple lesson.
Oh, so important. I mean, my other business is we're an industrial engineering repair contractor, and we work in all sorts of industrial facilities with specialized technicians. And I was just talking with my operations leader in a planning meeting on Monday. He says, you know, one of the things, and we were talking about a particular client, he says, one of the things that that particular client really values is that if our guys are, you know, the tasks for our people are not ready, that they don't sit and wait.
Yeah.
That they are reaching out to the client saying, what can I do while I'm waiting to be valuable?
Exactly.
And just that little bit changes the relationship with the client, where the client is not no longer evaluating your business's performance based on just what you did, but on what you were willing to do to be part of a contributing team.
Yes.
And I think that lesson starts off like right, you know, early in those adolescent years.
And
My
looking at your logo and your title, you know, the amplifier effect and the reverberations. I mean, to me, that's just a really visible visual symbol to realize that that's what you're doing by in that job, and having pride in that job. You can amplify your impact for yourself and your employer just by showing initiative.
Yeah, amplify your performance, amplify your impact, amplify, you know, how, the value that you're creating in anything. And that you don't have to be an entrepreneur to be an amplifier, right? You simply need to decide that you're not going to be running with the middle distance players,
Right.
right?
You stand apart by doing
And
that.
you know, in my career, that's how I grew, and I spent half of my career in what I have. You know, in retrospect, I was an entrepreneur in the corporate world. I did great, you know, in startup offices and really changing and innovating things. And then when the corporate bureaucracy hit me, that drove me crazy. And I did that for about 15 years until I realized, you know, that was great learning ground, but I was an entrepreneur and I needed to do things differently. And so being different, not being part of the pack in any career, it doesn't matter if you choose to be an entrepreneur or you just want to have a successful life. You need to put in a little more effort so that you add value, and generally those people get recognized.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, you went to college after Burger King, and you got out of college, and you got to meet this just a common actor from California by the name of Ronnie Reagan.
That's right.
Tell me about that. That to me, that's like I grew up thinking, Ronald Reagan was an icon of leadership in the Western world. He wasn't just an American president. He was, there was lots of things going on, but he was, known for ending the Cold War in some ways, and creating peace treaties, and tearing down, in some ways, tearing down the Iron Curtain simply because of his ability to build relationships with people and not letting a barrier, continue on, 50 years of they're my enemy and I don't talk to them.
Yeah.
How did you get involved with the Reagan administration? Like, tell me that journey.
So I think it goes back to our original, just a second ago discussion, was initiative. And there was, my father calls, it's not his quote, but he used to say it all the time, that luck is the place where preparation and opportunity meet. So you may have heard that phrase before. It's very prominent in my mental, in my little brain here. It sticks a lot. And I knew that at 16 because of what he would say. And so there was an opportunity to volunteer for the political convention in Dallas, where the nominating convention, and it was the renomination of Ronald Reagan as for his second term. So he'd already been president for 4 years at that point, or almost 4 years. So I went and I painted signs. I was a youth volunteer. I just did whatever needed to be done. But one of the things I think that stands out to me is I always say I did it, and I didn't like salami sandwiches. And so it's everything I credit to the fact that I actually don't like salami. But it was because because I really didn't, these sandwiches came for all these youth volunteers and they were all stacked on top of each other and they were slimy and gross and disgusting. So I thought, it feels funny just to sit here and not eat, because I really couldn't think of eating it. And so I walked around the other side of the table where they were handing them out and started handing them out with the staff that was there. So what really, it was just sort of a stepping stone. It was an innocent act in some ways, but looking back, it was a really pivotal moment because I literally pivoted from one side of the equation to the other and got to know the people who were making decisions. And then when the opportunities came to be a part of different aspects of the campaign, they called me. So it just was really, and I just kept saying, yes, put me to work. And I wasn't that picky about what it was, but people were looking out for me, making sure that I was getting a good experience. And by the time he was reelected, I was asked to come back and work on the inaugural committee in Washington, D.C. And sort of the rest is history. After 8 weeks, I was offered a job in the White House and I never left. And I lived there for most of my adult life until 10 years ago.
In Washington, in various roles.
Yes.
How old were you when you started working in the White House?
I think I was 22.
Wow.
So yes, I was making all the major decisions. I was, holding peace.
Yeah, we can thank nuclear disarmament to Shelby.
100%. I worked in the presidential advance office, which is I think is one of the most fun places to work in the White House because you interact with everybody, all the senior staff, you travel, you get to meet heads of state, you get to meet all different cultures, work within all different cultures. And it's very fast moving. I mean, it is, looking through my entrepreneurial lens, it's probably one of the most entrepreneurial offices in the White House. And the White House is one of the most entrepreneurial engines in the government. If there is an entrepreneurial engine in the government, that it would be the White House, because it's based on visionary thinking. It's based on looking ahead and anticipation, thinking up creative problem solving, that kind of thing, rather than executing plans, if that makes sense, from a visionary standpoint. It's very fast paced.
And so you said you traveled around the world and met heads of state. Tell me about a couple of really cool stories that you had during those times.
I just, I have one that I don't know why it came in my head this time, but Ronald Reagan really liked Lech Walesa of Poland. And he used to have a candle in the window of the White House in solidarity. It was the symbol of solidarity in Poland. And so he put one in the White House window during solidarity. So this was a long time ago. This is the anti-communist movement in Poland. And, we forget now, we're already almost 2 generations away from those moments, and we forget what grip communism had on this world. And I remember my grandfather, who was, we talked a little bit, but was a pioneer aviator who was very anti-communist, and he sounded kind of extreme. I was, oh, grandpa, we're living in peaceful times, et cetera. But, coming now 2 generations, 3 generations away from that, I'm getting that Ronald Reagan had a very special way of communicating the threat on democracy that communism held. And it is still, to me, to sound a little extreme, it's very alive today. Unfortunately, the threat is very alive, and it's just a little more insidious, and it's not as so much based on nuclear bombs facing each other, although there's plenty of that, but it's not that kind of Cold War anymore. It's a colder war, and it's more insidious war. So
yeah, I mean, I think the communist, the communist threat to the world today is fueled by, they have latched on to capitalism to fuel their belief system, right? So particularly China, but equally maybe less communistic and more totalitarian in Russia, but they're latching on to the open markets to move fuel, to build everything from iPhones to computer chips to advancing artificial intelligence, and they have major economies now that can fuel their ideology, and they are doing it on our dime.
Yeah, it's a very complicated world. It's very So Ronald Reagan had a clarity of thought around that. And it was almost, maybe it was a simpler time in that sense, but he knew what was right and wrong from his perspective, and he followed that. He knew that it was right to support Lech Walesa. And so I had the opportunity to work with both of them and see them both. So after President Reagan was out of office, he went to Poland for the first time, and I was asked to be the lead on that event in Poland, in Warsaw. So I get to go and be involved in a society this was still when Lech Wałęsa was in the shipyards in Gdansk. He wasn't president of Poland, but he announced his presidency for Poland while Ronald Reagan was there. So to see the two worlds converge like that was really kind of amazing. And to see the fact that Lech Wałęsa became the president of Poland, who had been a shipyard worker, union leader, shipyard worker in Gdansk, Poland, and now was the leader of a newly democratic Poland. And one of my favorite memories was literally running around in the Belvedere, the vodka Belvedere. Mm-hmm. That's the White House of Poland. The Belvedere is and Polish, it's Polish vodka. So when that came out, I was like, hey, I've been in that building. We were in the Belvedere when he first took over as president. And literally, I was like, does anybody else work here except the president and the three people that we were dealing with? Because it was like they moved into an empty house and there was nobody else there. I mean, it was just such a strange feeling. I felt like I was just kind of had the free run of the place, and they were literally setting up democracy as we were in this building. So just the reverberations of the ghosts, of communism in the halls versus democracy. And it was just, I look back on it and I think, gosh, how lucky was I to be kind of sitting there in the middle of all that, just doing my job, trying to help my job was to help other people get their job done.
Yeah. It's amazing how when you don't experience it, or you don't have some sort of tangible way to rationalize it, it's just something that happened on the news.
Yes.
In my industrial life, we've done work in Aruba, and there's a series of there's a big refinery there. I don't even know, it's been a lot of years, but one of the first times I was there, my team were removing old equipment, and they were trying to refurbish this refinery, and they were taking valves out. And some of the valves had swastikas on them because the refinery was built during before World War II with Nazi Germany manufactured products.
Oh, amazing!
And the minute that you see that and touch that, it makes that way more real than watching a history documentary about what happened 70 years ago. Because, wow, this was real, right? And when you touch that and you see it or you experience it, it makes it that much differently. Now, a really big physical symbol of the Cold War was the Berlin Wall. Mm-hmm. And it came down. Now, Reagan, there's a news clip, a media clip that will be shown forever where he talked about that. Can you tell me about where you were and what he said?
Sure. I had been in this speech happened right after the economic summit for all of the, I think it was the G7 at the time or something, but so it was Japan and Germany and UK and the US, et cetera, and Italy. And so we were in Italy was hosting it. So we were in Venice. And we had a team in Berlin setting up this event, because after the Venice summit, the president was going to Berlin. So my boss at the time, a guy named Jim Hooley, said, why don't put me on what we call the backup plane. It would look just like Air Force One. It flew, right with it. And we went to Berlin, landed in Tempelhof Airport, which I was able to tell everybody that we would drop, because the Tempelhof Airport really isn't used much anymore, but you fly over the buildings of Berlin and then you have to drop. It's not a descent like this, but I knew that because my grandfather made the first New York to Berlin flight. And he told me when I was flying into Berlin that pay attention to this, because you're going to notice that that's how you're going to land. Your stomach kind of drops out. So even from the very beginning, I kind of had this anticipation of that Berlin would be kind of a stomach dropping experience, if that's the right way to put it. But so I was sort of a great tag along. I got there, we went in the motorcade, the president went off to see the mayor of Berlin in a small meeting, and then part of the motorcade peeled off. We went to Tempelhof Airport and watched him give a speech there. And then we went off to the Berlin Wall in anticipation, where my colleagues who had been setting up this event had bratwurst and beer off to the right of the stage for us, the traveling delegation. And there was a tower there, like a walk-up tower that was, 2 stories high kind of thing. And so we could walk up to the top of that and look over into East Berlin, over the wall, into where Brandenburg Gate was, inside East Berlin. And see that there was nobody there. And then you turned around and looked into West Berlin, and it was just millions of people, lining the streets. It looked a lot like it did when John Kennedy was there. And so the distinction, the on-off switch was just, I mean, it was amazing. It gave you chills just to look at it. And then we came back down off of that vantage point. The president came and he went up and looked over it with the chief of staff, and he made the comment. I've had the conversation with the former chief of staff, Ken Duberstein, that he made the comment to him of, this is the only wall that's ever been built to keep people in it for a country, besides a prison, right? So, and so he came back down and gave this iconic speech, which we knew was probably going to have a dramatic impact on the world, partly because of the internal struggle that was going on between the speechwriters, the Secretary of State, the diplomats, and the West Wing and the president himself. And they kept taking this line out of the speech that said, tear down this wall. And the president kept putting it back in. So he, just like I said before, he had a lot of clarity on who he was, what he was. And I have talked about in the past, in a TED Talk and other places, that the relationship that they had developed, that Reagan and Gorbachev had developed by that point, I believe made it a safe bet to say what he said, because he didn't say it it was a challenge, but he did it. He implored, it was almost as if he put himself on the same side of the table with Mr. Gorbachev and said, if you value freedom as you say you do, then tear down this symbolism of oppression, tear down this wall. It wasn't like, you better tear it down or I'm coming to get you. There was a big difference in the way. It was definitely a bold statement. And the diplomats, who I appreciate diplomacy a lot, they wanted to water it down. And he just knew I think he just had that instinct to know that that was going to be the right thing to say at the right time. And sure enough, it became an iconic moment. And here we were listening to it going, okay, here it comes. He's going to say it now. And we're drinking beer and eating bratwurst just off stage. Just if you're
20, 30, 40 feet away from him.
40 feet away. If you're looking at the picture, we're just out of the picture. And my boss used to say, if you're in the picture as an advanced person, if you're in the picture, you're in the wrong place. So I feel like Forrest Gump a lot, except only I'm outside of the picture. I'm just outside of the screen. This is me out here usually. And my colleagues, we would always be not in the picture very much.
Yeah, but based on that context and understanding what Reagan had done with relationship building with Gorbachev, it was less of a threatening a rival rather than challenging a friend to move faster in the direction that he felt that they were going. Right.
That's how I look at it. I think that's how history looks at it when you get deep into it. But it's also it was provocative, but it wasn't. It wasn't a threat. And I think that, when we talk about the things that I write about civility and these kinds of things, we need to learn how to communicate with each other. And whether it's, across town, across the company, across the countries, across borders, anything that sets up a paradigm where there's a non sequitur, where there's no answer to the question that somebody poses, then it doesn't go anywhere. And so, but I also am a peace through strength kind of girl. And I think that we had strength. He believed in peace through strength. He felt that there was a lot of ways to prevent other people from making bad decisions if they knew that the consequence was going to be worse. So by having the holding the card of strength is not a bad strategy either. Just not using it, right?
Yeah, well, obviously you have spent your career with civility and protocol as tools for relationship and how that can enhance lives and relationships. And I can't help but think that, in that particular situation with Reagan and Gorbachev, like some of the first times that they were to meet in summits where you would have a traditional standoff on either side of the table, that's not where Reagan started with Gorbachev, is it?
No, I mean, they got to know each other in an intimate setting. But, if you look at some of the pictures you see that where there's something called rapport. So that when people are in rapport, you can see it because they face each other. And if you're into things like neuro linguistic programming and NLP and all that, you can actually, people can use that skill for good or evil. So if you want to de-escalate something, or if you want to escalate a discussion, you can control that by how you interact with the person in front of you. And so when you see them in some pictures, you can tell when they're in rapport and when they're not. And they had a moment, you know, that it was like, okay, well, we've just got to walk away right now because we're not getting anywhere. And where they weren't in rapport, but we were willing to keep talking. And so when you look at some of the pictures throughout the different meetings, the Reykjavik meetings, Geneva meeting, Moscow, and then DC, that you find that there's most of the times that they're in great rapport. And I think one of the biggest symbols of that was when I had the honor of working on President Reagan's funeral in Washington, DC, as one of the top couple of people working on the program. And he, you know, when Mr. Gorbachev came to the funeral and came into the rotunda to pay respects to his fallen colleague, I mean, what better way is there to emphasize and put the exclamation point on that enemies are, you know, it's up to us, and that we don't have to be. And the fact that I think that Gorbachev in a way gave up he collapsed the Soviet Union in a lot of ways. And he was the beginning of the collapse of the Soviet Union. And he is not necessarily hailed as a hero in the Soviet Union. So I give him a lot of credit for being very brave to do something that was not necessarily popular.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it isn't well known, but, you know, after some of the things he did to tear down the wall and to bridge the East and the West, you know, he was, you know, there was a bit of a silent coup removing him because of some of the communist sort of hardliners. You know, he was under house arrest and sort of got sidelined, but he had already made such a big impact and exposed the weaknesses economically and socially of the Soviet Union that there was a momentum built that kept it going in a lot of ways. But, you know, he definitely wasn't celebrated, you know, the way that we celebrate him in the West, I think. But
yeah.
I remember hearing you talking about, you know, one of the things that Reagan would do to build rapport before they got at the table with any rival or any negotiation was that rapport building started by him. Let's take a walk.
Let's take a walk. Yeah, they walked outside and by just themselves, and that caused a lot of consternation with staff. Just an interpreter, and you know, because everybody wants to be there to make sure they're taking the notes, and they've all got a job to do, which I totally respect. But there was a little bit of pushback. But let's just call me Ron. You know, I mean, call me. He didn't say call me Mr. President or anything like that, or President Reagan. He said call me Ron, and it seems so simple and so like not world events, you know, important, but I think that there was an intention to humanize one another and to show that we're just two guys trying to have a conversation. And that went a long way to when they did have difficult conversations to be able to come back to the table.
Right. So you've got this, you know, these experience with him developing a rapport and showing respect with a rival. You have a similar story, less rivalrous, with Reagan at an elevator. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
In fact, I'm looking at a draft of an article that's going to be in Forbes next week that I'm editing my draft right now. It's called After You. So I call it my After You story because he was just a very kind person in general and very respectful to everyone, concerned about everyone's well-being as much as he possibly could be. And so when we would get to an elevator. My simple little interactions with him would be walking through a building and getting into an elevator. And my job was to lead him. And then the elevator would open. As the advanced person, you want to be in advance. You want to be ahead. So when you're the first person in an elevator, you're usually the last person out. Right. So a little accounting term, LIFO, BIFO, whatever, last in, first out. So I wanted to be the last in, the first out, and he wouldn't let me. So it's after you. And I'd say, after you, Mr. President. He'd say, oh no, after you. And Okay, no, you. And so pretty soon I make the joke that pretty soon Secret Service would just sort of say, just get in the elevator, let's keep going. And then I'd have to kind of squish around and to get out front again so that, you know, because I was taking him where we were supposed to be going.
Right.
So a simple little thing, but it's just memorable with him. It's so cute. And I have my colleague, Joanne Drake, who's the chief administrative officer at the Reagan Library. Basically, we both she has the same experience with him, and she spent many years of her life devoted to he and his family and his legacy as she went back with him after the White House years and has been, you know, in charge of the Reagan legacy ever since, essentially. So she has that same experience with him. So we like to regale that a little bit, and what a kind man he was. He was very kind. If he saw somebody one time, she tells a story about, he was doing a photo op out on the South Lawn with a whole group of people from, gosh, I'm trying to think, it was like sports team or something like that. But one person kind of got jumbled up, you know, rustled around, and he thought the Secret Service did it. The president thought that maybe somebody kind of pushed him out of the way, you know, when the president came through. And so he had, I think it was Joanne, the same person, go out and try to find the person who got jostled. And it took a bit, and she went and found that person and brought him back to the Oval Office, where he apologized. And he said, oh, it was Olympians. It was Olympians, because the Olympian, I can't remember who it was, but there's pictures of it, took his gold medal and put it on the president. And so and there's a photo of that. And that was because he thought that person had been, like, something had gone wrong and he hasn't treated. So out of the corner of his eye, he's taking note to make sure that people are treated with dignity and respect, which is a core foundation to a civilized practice. You know, something to being a good person in this world is to care about others.